3 cards you should check out from Modern Horizons 3.
Next on Eternal Dirtles.
Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Dirtle Maniacs. If you want to be a Dirtle Maniac, go to patreon.com/eternaldurtles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show.
Hello and welcome to Eternal Dirtles. I'm your host, Zach Clark. With me once more, Phil Blackman is back. Phil, how's it going, man?
Bro, I am depleted. I am tired. I'm washed, dude. I'm washed.
It's exciting to have you back, man. It was a lot of work on both of our ends, I want to say. Keeping up with the cast, getting the guests and stuff like that, but also you were out just like literally boss manning it for that musical for the last match.
It was cool. You got to come and see it, so you can give an honest review. Yeah.
I really wish that I had invited more people out. I tried, to get a couple people, but without having seen it, I didn't have much to go on. Now I want you guys to come back so I can get other people. It was so fun.
Yeah, when we sell the show and we get a residency somewhere, we do another tour. I'll once again let everybody know, because I will once again be off of the cast for a little bit. I mean, presumably, but anybody who's curious about what I was up to the last however many weeks at this point, 2 months almost, I want to say. Just go over thelastmatch.com, and you'll see everything I've been working on.
So much
fun. Now it's time to talk about some nerd cards.
Yeah, let's do that actually. So we've got 3 cards. The spoiler isn't complete yet for Modern Horizons 3. Of course, we didn't get one again. But I didn't get a preview card, I should say. But I did want to talk about 3 cards. 2 cards. One card I'm excited about. One card Phil's excited about, and then a third card that Phil's also excited about. As we move into spoiler season. This episode is brought to you by Tales of Adventure. Go to toamagic.com and use the code DIRTLES for 5% off your order. You'll be directly supporting the show, and you'll get the entire order in one package. No more waiting for several packages. That's toamagic.com, code DIRTLES for 5% off. So let's start with Ugin's Labyrinth. That's the one I'm excited about, and I think to me that's going to be the card out of the set that that's going to be the chase card. I think. So let's talk about Ugin's Labyrinth. Ugin's Labyrinth is it's a land, and it produces 1 colorless mana, but you can imprint it, and when you imprint it, you can exile a card with mana value 7 or greater from your hand, and if you've done that, it produces 2 colorless mana, and then you can tap it to return the exiled card to its owner's hand. So it's kind of like what is it, Gemstone Cavern, where you get that burst of mana early, but you can get the card back. That imprint is kind of huge because you get to a point where you're like, oh man, I have 12 mana, I just wanted to cast my 7-drop or whatever, and you can use it to get this back. But it's also a soul land, which is ridiculous. This format, there are plenty of cards in this format that find a colorless land, that's not great. But a double colorless land, soul land, getting access to more soul lands is obviously good. And I'm not positive yet, but this could replace Cavern of Souls in some decks, I think. And not in all decks, but in possibly in 8-cast, the way I'm thinking about building it now. I think this could be a really interesting card. Phil, what do you think?
This card, more than any other that has been, there have been a bunch that have given me this effect, but, dude, did we just grow up in a time where we were just so conditioned that, there had to be some kind of downside, or cost to something? Because it just feels like...
Do you remember when your 3/4 for 3 dealt 1 damage to you? Well, Pepperidge Farm remembers.
The shit that's weird to me is I saw this thing, and the first thing that I couldn't believe was that they added the line of text that you can return the card. Yeah. I was like, what do we can you imagine if they printed Chrome Mox now and they were like, yeah, imprint something and then you can just tap it to return the card back to your hand, and it would still tap for So wait, so my understanding is if you imprint the card and then you return it, it no longer taps for 2, correct?
Yeah, it just taps for 1.
Taps for 1. Yeah. So
that's fine. We're okay with that. You get to a
like
point
very,
where
yeah.
you're producing like 8 mana, and you're like, oh, I'll take the 7-drop and put it into play, right?
Yeah. Okay. So it's not entirely. It's not just like all free, I guess, because you do, offset the fact that once you have unimprinted the card, that it doesn't tap for 2 anymore.
Yeah.
But
and you have to play 7-drops.
Yeah, and I think that's really the trick now is like, okay, in the same way that Up the Beanstalk has like made you only look at cards with 5 CMC or greater, or like how Jace Reawaken makes you look at only things with CMC 3 or less. Like that's the one caveat where you're like, okay, the deck building restriction in order to turn this on is I just have to be on 7 or higher.
Yeah.
And what deck is that? Like, is that just the affinity deck? Is that like?
Here's the thing. So I'll dig into a couple of other cards in the set real fast that like kind of work well with Ugin's Labyrinth that I think we'll see play in Legacy. So you've got that big Ugin himself, right? Having a card that's exiled with a 7 means that he just comes into play with like Annihilator 7, right? Like, so that's bonkers. And then you've got that new like Frogmite that costs 7 that's like a Mirror Enforcer or whatever. So there is an affinity deck that exists, right, with like Thought Monitor, that maybe the other 7-drop 4/4 that has affinity, right?
Right.
And Kozilek's Unsealing, right? That says 4, 5, 6 cost thing creatures put 2 2/01 spawn into play that you can sack for mana, and then 7 above draw you 3 cards. So you can get to a point where you're just churning through your deck with that. And this card allows you to play, those higher cost cards and actually get to the point where you can cast them. And they have like reduced mana costs. It's a whole thing. So I think there are a lot of cards in this set that will lend to a new style of like stompy affinity deck. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, I agree that affinity, that initial deck seems like the easiest because when you tap to put the card back into your hand, just being able to cast something for free, constrains the timing window. And you touched on the Ugin, or not the new Ugin, the new Ulamog, right?
Yeah, Ulamog, that's what it is. Yeah,
Ulamog.
Yeah.
So yeah, the new Ulamog is also like the cast trigger of exile half your library, and then you just get the Annihilator. I mean, that functionally to me, like there's so much flavor text on that card. That's one of those cards where once it's cast, the game is just over.
Yeah.
Because like the ward on that thing of sacrificing 2 permanents, it's like, okay, it's exactly Terminus or bust, but like you've also exiled half the library. So it's like, even if you have anything to get rid of this thing, you are still having to sack permanents anyway. Now they're not targeted, you get to choose, but it is also one of those things where I don't know if that card would actually ever replace the previous Ulamog, because the cast trigger of getting to exile 2 targets is, I think, just so much, like, that's so much more game ending than exiling half the library.
Half your library means nothing.
Yeah. I don't actually anticipate ever running into this card, even though it seems like it would just be obnoxious to lose to.
Well, I think
because the other one I think is just more pointed.
I think you might see Cloud Post come back as a deck, Phil, and that is not a great matchup for Miracles, right? That's a deck that's like, a pretty bad matchup for Miracles to begin with, right?
Did Cloud Post ever leave?
I mean, has Cloud Post ever been a deck?
I mean, to the same extent, like, has Miracles ever been a deck since 2017?
You're triggering like the 4 people that play Cloud Post.
I mean, I know that like there's been some high on with what's that new, the Lava Spur boots or whatever with Urza Saga. So there has been some talk of like, okay, well, any deck that can fit in Urza Saga for Lava Spur boots just turns haste on like a bunch of other things beyond. Like if you turn your Elvish Reclaimer and you give it haste, and then like prismatic endings and shit just don't matter anymore. Like,
not to mention like Elvish Reclaimer with haste into Merit Lodge with haste. That's something, right? And
there's also the new card. We're just talking about a bunch of new cards now because they all just like sort of fit into this home. But like storing, what is the new Wildwood card? That's a 4-mana copy card in the graveyard.
It's really a 3 mana if you count the fact that it produces mana, right?
It can tap for itself. Yeah. So you have to tap 4 mana, including itself, to just copy something. But like in worlds where like you want wasteland redundancy plus green sources, plus like you could also, in response to something like crop rot something into that, and then make mana anyway, and then you do that at instant speed, untap huge thing. Like there's also like that space for like, I mean, yeah, it's an Eldrazi set, of course.
Yeah, Shifting
Cloudpost
Woodland is the name of the card. Yeah,
Shifting Woodland. I mean, of course, Cloudpost is going to get new toys when you're talking about an Eldrazi set, because in order to support Eldrazi, you have to put in things that Cloudpost just inherently is going to find desirable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is this the new Soul Land going to be like obviously very good? Yes, but I think that it's the difference though is in that 7 CMC, because every other Stompy deck that's good wants exactly 3 mana cards that are 2 colorless and a pip.
Yeah.
Where this one wants, more or less specifically like the Cloudpost style shit. And
big guys, yeah.
We're not looking at things like, Reality Smasher or that sort of dopey shit that, because that's not going to turn on the Soul Land in the same way. And you still have Eye of Ugin for all that stuff. So it's not like, you were clamoring for Soul Lands, 16 through 20, or 17 through whatever. But I mean, this land will obviously find homes. Like without a doubt, it's going to find homes. The thing that I'm interested in is it's colorless cards, and so it's making me think of cards that are colorless that aren't just like the Eldrazi fatties. Like that, I remember there's like a 9 mana colorless Eldrazi sorcery from like a couple of sets ago, where it's like time walk plus draw 4 cards plus do a whole bunch of shit. And so I'm like, maybe there's a world where instead of just playing like these, actually like you can all is dust underneath your fucking Soul Land now, and then just if you do need a Wrath, you just put it back in your hand, and if you don't need a Wrath, whatever, you just played a thick Chrome Mox. So I think the one difference though is that this card is an imprint on a land, not an imprint in the way that we've seen on like a Chrome Mox or another thing.
Chrome Mox,
so like,
you opponent like hits it, then you've lost 2 cards, right? Like, right. Now Wasteland exists, obviously.
Yeah,
but so to that end, I think that this card will certainly see play. It may be format warping in the same way that like Urza Saga was format warping, but it's going to definitely be archetype warping, I think.
I think that one thing that is a little bit under the radar is the play pattern of it is this isn't like your typical, it doesn't seem like your typical Stompy Soul Land, in that if you play this and imprint a card, okay, you're 2 cards there for your Soul Land, but that's your land drop. Where it's like in any other iteration, you'd play Ancient Tomb plus Chrome Mox plus card. So that's your land drop plus 2 cards, where this would be your land drop plus card, plus you would need then Lotus Petal or some other mana source. And if it's a Chrome Mox, that means that you're going down an additional card. So the combination of cards that you would need is, okay, colorless 7 drop or thicker, plus this land, plus a Chrome Mox, plus another card, plus a payoff on 3. And your payoffs on 3 are at odds with the number of cards that you want to turn on this thicker Soul Land. So the caveat of needing that additional like thicker 7 drop might be the thing that like, contextualizes this into not just being, another Ancient Tomb, because it's clear like it's obviously not, because Ancient Tomb is free, whereas this actually has some amount of deck building restriction behind it because of exactly that sort of play pattern.
Eternal Dirtles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned. All right, well, let's move on to Brain Surge. You were pretty hype about this card. I call it Look at the Big Brain on Brett, but it's 2 colorless and a blue for an instant that says draw 4 cards, then put 2 back on top of your library in any order. Big Brainstorm.
So it's Big Brainstorm, but it's Big Brainstorm that's a card advantage brainstorm. So 2 things for me. For a long time, I've always wanted access to a playable, recurable, instant speed 3-drop. And by recurable, I mean with Mystic Sanctuary. So to finally have something that's in that space, I mean, pour one out for Dream Cash. But it is like, I am really high on this card because I think that the implications of what this actually looks like, because it's an instant, are they're sort of subtle. But like being able to effectively draw a brand new hand in response to whatever your opponent does is way more powerful than people think. Now, don't get me wrong, 3 mana is a lot of mana. That's not just, you're not just doing anything with that. But it's like if you do something and then in response, think about like when you would factor fiction in response to something, and then you just like find the answer to whatever's on the stack, and then you just use that information. If you're drawing 4 cards to putting 2 back, you are functionally just building a brand new hand. Like 4 cards is so many cards. And being able to get rid of 2 cards worth of chafe back on top of your library in like any meaningful ways, I don't think people realize the depth of how insane that exchange actually is, and the fact that it goes up a card in all of these other ways that like you've had instant speed interaction of like, you know, where you go up a card and then you discard a card, or you know, like all these ways that don't actually inherently work with the rest of what a deck, at least that I like to play, tries to do. Brain Surge is like solving a bunch of holes in between all that, on top of just being like an insane reactionary card to begin with in general. I think the problem with Brain Surge becomes that the decks that would want to play it, if you're not playing it as the suite of four of like I'm just going to be doing for the rest of my life,
Yeah.
You start to get into the space of like your deck space starts to become really, really, really tight. And now we're looking at, okay, there's a bunch of staples that just exist to like be competitive because you have to play just the most optimized stuff. Like if you're playing a reactionary long game deck, like you need the selection in order to line the cards up right. Then you need the answers that are most efficient to line up against all of the answers that are way too powerful. And so like as time goes on, we're just getting to the space where a lot of cards are just dictated for you as to like requirements in order to play a certain archetype. And I feel like if Brain Surge is as good as I believe that it will be, that is just going to be an additional slot. And then now we're looking at like, okay, the backbone of a deck isn't just Ponder, Brainstorm, Swords to Plowshares, Force of Will, some amount of Prismatic Ending or the like, plus some number of sweepers, plus, you know, now Lorien revealed to some extent. Yeah. It's like the more and more we get to, it's like these decks, there are enough cards that just seem head and shoulders power level above the rest that the deck itself sort of builds itself. And then now it just becomes, okay, how much space can we actually allocate? And then what are the numbers that we use to figure out, like, do we play 3 Brain Surge instead of 4? If we're playing 3 Brain Surge, which is a bunch of 3 drops, how many basics do we have to play? Does that number of basics then infringe again upon the number of slots that we have available in our deck? Are we then moving away from the really powerful interaction that Lorien revealed offers? Does that mean that if we move towards basics, that like we have to move back into 2 colors instead of 3 colors? But if we move back into 2 colors, that means that we're losing something really powerful on the back end of both sideboard cards and Prismatic Ending being able to hit up to 3 mana. So there's like a bunch of considerations that I don't think that there's necessarily a solve yet. I haven't, you know, thought too deeply about it, but I'm definitely convinced that Brain Surge is awesome, and I'm going to play a lot of it.
I want to make two points about Brain Surge in its favor. One is previously for this effect, we were paying 5 mana for Thought Flare, which was 3, a blue, and a red, and it was draw 4, discard 2. Discard, presumably better than put back onto your deck. But there was that. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was, is this card better than, say, Questing Druid? Because you're only playing 1 color, you're still getting that 2 extra cards, but you're seeing 4 cards. Like, is that selection worth more than like a body, right? For that 1 extra mana.
I mean, are you talking specifically for something like Delver?
Yeah, for Delver.
0% that sees play in Delver.
Fair enough.
and because it's a 3-drop, that's not a threat. Like there's just no way that they would ever make space for that. I would be stunned if we were in that space. Like the options are so powerful for what they would have access to, that to lean into a non-threat 3-drop, like it's like you get to Expressive Iteration because that's a one of a kind card advantage card that's also 2 mana within color and works with the rest of the deck. Where, you know, an additional Brainstorm for 3 mana, even though it goes up a card, is just like not the same space. Like Expressive Iteration was the card advantage tool because it lets you like continue to spell sling, where it's like if you're spending 3 mana, you are not still spell slinging. Like if you think of Questing Druid on 3 mana, like even if you did it at sorcery speed to like find a threat, if you were on 3 mana, you could Questing Druid plus DRC or plus Delver in a way that like that's just not even remotely in the ballpark for something like Brain Surge. And the fact that you have the back end threat, like if you think about Questing Druid is theoretically drawing 2 cards, but it's also drawing the 3rd card of itself. So you always know that you're drawing a threat. I would be shocked if anybody is playing Brain Surge other than exactly me and the other, like, you know, control pilots that, you know, just are looking to feel something other than Uro.
Yeah. I do want to just point out that like looking at 4 cards is a lot of cards. So
it's a lot of cards. Yeah, it is definitely a lot of cards.
It might be worth like in those control style decks to think about, like, is that selection worth more than like that you got to use it now, velocity style of draw two solution that we've been messing around with, right?
Well, I think that one thing that also that like is sort of forgotten in this space is that this is a draw go kind of card, right? Like this wants to see what you're doing and then like reload on like figure out what of these additional 4 cards, this brand new hand, like how does the world look now that I have access to all of these different options? Whereas every other version of Control at the moment is, much more like tap out Snowball. And to like try and play this alongside all the tap out Snowball, you're just going to be in positions where you're like, all right, either I'm snowballing or I'm playing positional. And if you're not committed to one or the other, then you're sort of like Beanstalk just wants the snowballs. It doesn't need selection because it's just going on raw volume because everything is free. So the play pattern of like stick this 2-drop draw card, play nothing but free spells that cost 5 or more, draw a bunch of cards. Maybe I have Uro on the back end as like, whatever, because it's just the easiest snowball that's like, the thickest and the cheapest. Okay, cool. But like something like this is, I feel like Brain Surge is like appealing more so to like my wing of the controlled players, where like we want to play positional. We don't like the lack of agency that Snowball feels like it has. And so I would sort of be surprised if the people who have access to green are not play with this at all. I think if you have green in your control deck, you're not really going to be, tempted to play with Brain Surge after you get it out of your system for the first, couple of rounds.
Yeah. All right. So before we head on to the next card, which I think will be very short, I just want Phil to explain why this card's good. I just want to remind everybody, if you get a chance, like, subscribe. If you want to support the show, and we really wish you would, you can go to Eternal Durdles at patreon.com/Eternal Durdles, and that support's really going to help us out. So the final card, Phil, tell us about it.
So you were very kind, and you were like, why I think it'll be good. I think it'll be another one of the cards that I like enjoy testing because it's filling a role that like I find desirable, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be good. But it's Tamiyo meets the Story Circle. It's a saga. It's 1 in a blue. When the first chapter is if a creature attacks you or a planeswalker until your next turn, creatures get -2/-0. The second chapter is you can discard any number of cards and then you investigate twice for each card discarded. And then chapter 3 is you can shuffle up to 3 cards from your graveyard back into your library. Now,
so this is just a card that you just want to put 2 of in your deck and no win conditions. So you have your Feldon's Cane.
I do really like the fact that it is its own win condition, yes. Yeah. But in a similar spot where I've like, been intrigued by other things, I think that I feel like chapter 1 for the most part is effectively a time walk against any deck that's trying to pressure your life total. Now, obviously, this card is going to be blank against any type of deck that you don't need white cards against. So like, even though this is a blue card, I think of it, the first chapter is very much in that white card space. So if your white cards if your white cards don't have text in the matchup, then I don't necessarily think that this does either. Yeah. So that first chapter of time walking to get an additional land drop, to get an additional turn, to like just, curry your life total. Because one of the things that I've wanted for a long time is essentially like, I've wanted blue-white instant, exactly the text of Gaia's Blessing, gain 3 life.
Yeah. And that's doing this for the most part, right?
Well, I think it's doing it in ways that aren't necessarily obvious. So, like, if I'm looking at a card and like I desire to see gain some amount of life, do some amount of recycling from the graveyard back into the deck, that way you can go infinite, and then some amount of card advantage. This sort of does all 3 just in a really roundabout way. Yeah. So even though it doesn't actually physically say gain life, debuffing all of your opponent's creatures until your next turn, in effect, is going to gain some amount of life of whatever that attack was worth if there was an attack to be had. So there is that, which it's not life gain, but it's close. It's not life gain because it is theoretically harboring your life total a bit. And then chapter 2 is discard any number of cards. And then the difference here is that you're not seeing those cards immediately, right? But in a deck that I like to play, which is I love I feel really I'm on Deduce Truther, right? I've been on 4 Deduce since it came out. Yeah. And it's only proven its worth because when you're playing Miracles, just having draw cards sit on the table is really, really powerful. And the idea that you could play this, blank their combat step, untap, go to chapter 2 after your draw step, discard a Terminus, make 2 clues, and then from that point forward, every fetch theoretically represents your Mystic Sanctuary into Terminus into, a clue on the board for that Terminus. Like, the play patterns of all of that seem really hot. And then the other side of being able to recycle back into your deck is it opens up lanes where currently before the only things that you could recur were instants and sorceries, but you couldn't recur lands. So you'd move into things like Life from the Loam or other things to recur the non-instants and sorceries, because if you got wastelanded or anything like that, or if you wanted to play a win condition that wasn't an instant and sorcery, looking at you in Tree, that okay, now you're sort of bottlenecked because you are no longer infinite, right? Like Mystic Sanctuary plus Thor, that represents infinite if it's an instant or sorcery that you're looking to recur.
Yeah.
But if you have some amount of recycling, then now anything can be the win condition, because you theoretically then have infinite win conditions. But like if you play 2 of these, your win condition becomes itself. Right, so you're bottlenecked into recycling at least one of your 3 cards is that card, but then one of the other 3 cards can be whatever your other win condition is if you need to recycle it back in. And if you're playing for the long game, then your inevitability is, okay, I can now actually play a threat that has utility outside of just being a win condition. I no longer have to play actual factual, like this is only a win condition card the way that Entreat is. You can actually play cards that have other value that incidentally can also be win conditions. But then, the inevitability of that is you just get to the space where it's like, why would you even play that card if you could just play 2 Tamiyo Meet Circle and you can deck your opponent anyway? And then that's the win condition. And like you just win through inevitability, and rather than trying to beat your opponent, you just try to not die. And then that's the whole game plan. So it checks off a whole bunch of these boxes. And
exactly,
I think that's why it's good. Yeah.
All right, well, those are the 3 cards we've chosen to spotlight before we go into full spoiler season. The next time we talk about MH3, might be a little tactical stuff, but the big one, we'll have the big full episode. Those are always huge. Anyhow, thank you everyone for watching. Remember, like, subscribe, share, support us if you can. Thanks for watching. For the gift that keeps on giving all year round, join our Patreon at patreon.com/eternaldurdles. And hey, check out this playlist we got up here with all of our interviews over the last couple of years. Some great people from the Legacy community, some really great guests.